I think we might get started now, Maya, if you're ready.
All right, perfect. So I'd love to welcome you to this morning's WIDAC digital event under a new lens, Discovering Universal Design. So my name's Maya. I'm the diversity coordinator at WIDAC Melbourne, and I'm also an architect at Taylor Knights Architects. I'd like to begin today by acknowledging the traditional custodians of the land on which we meet today. I pay my respects to their elders past and present, and I extend my respects to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples here today. So to start things off, a bit of this morning's agenda. I'll let you know firstly what WIDAC is about. Then go on to a couple of upcoming events and workshops that we have, introduce you to the job board, send thanks to our digital partner. We'll then have a live interacting polling questions. We'll then go on to the presentation and Q&A by Maurice Goding. We'll have another series of polling questions afterwards, and then end on a thank you to everyone involved. Just a bit of housekeeping for today. Can everyone please mute their microphones for the duration of the presentation? We're really keen to get your questions, so feel free to write these in the chat, or just remember and hang on to them, and Adele will collate them. Adele and I will collate them from the chat. So at WIDAC, our mission is to empower, inspire, challenge and actively support women within the design, construction and related industries by creating a community of resilient and like-minded individuals. We coordinate numerous events and workshops throughout the year, featuring guest speakers and industry professionals who impart knowledge and strategies for personal development and growth. Up on the screen there is our 5 key pillars, which are networking and friendships, knowledge sharing, support and guidance, growth and development, and recognition and celebration. So we've got a couple more events before the year finishes. We've got a digital one coming up on the 11th of November, which is a Friends of Industry event. This is a key project presentation on the Queen Vic Markets renewal. And we've also got our Christmas celebration on the 2nd of December, and fingers crossed we can do this face to face. So our industry job board, just thought I'd let you know about that. I guess it's one of our latest initiatives for our community. It sort of targets businesses really on the hunt for exceptional talent, and they can advertise with us for just $50. The job board also caters to a wide range of professions in the construction industry, at a variety levels. So there's internships being offered, there's positions for more established people sort of midway through their career, and also for people looking for sort of a pre-retirement position. I had a look at the job board last night, and just last night there's positions advertised for contracts manager, architect, studio manager, BD and marketing advisor, hydraulic, fire and mechanical engineer positions, contract administrator, project manager, estimator, landscape architect, the list goes on. So it's a really great resource. I'd like to thank our digital partner, Polytech. We really appreciate partnering with them on this event. And we have a video to play from them.
Thank you to Polytech. Thanks, Maya. We might actually just jump over into our first round of polling questions, and I will hand back to you for our key presentation today. Hi, everyone. My name is Adele. I have a blank screen at the moment because it's far too early in the morning for any kind of presentableness. I'm just going to share some polling questions with you about universal design and your basic understanding of what universal design is. So the poll should pop up in just a moment. There we go. You should be able to see it there. All right, these are really interesting results. I am actually just going to end the poll and share the results with everybody now. So we've got a really even mix of people who feel like they do have a good understanding of universal design. And I think that's actually very positive to see that almost everybody thinks that most people are affected by universal design. Alrighty, Maya, I will hand over back to you.
Thanks, Adele. So I'm delighted to introduce our three speakers today. Nick Morris, who is the Director of Morris Golding Access Consultants, Belinda Cameron, who is also an Access Consultant, and Molly Purvis, Access Consultant. Nick's going to kick things off by a bit of an introduction, including, I guess, his personal journey to win a Paralympic gold medal and also being awarded an Order of Australia medal. Belinda will talk about DDA, universal design, accessibility and human movement, and relate that to Australian standards, National Construction Code, and safety and design. And Molly will wrap things up. She'll go into detail on the more detailed aspects of design, using amenities as an example, and also demonstrate through sort of her lived experience why universal design is a key component of all design. So welcome you, Nick, to share your screen and take it away.
Terrific. Well, thanks everyone for the opportunity. It's amazing how design and universal design and all those things have changed over time. And I think I'm a classic example of when I was 16, I was riding on a motorbike and I was a country boy. I played lots of state level cricket and football. And then one day I decided to jump on a motorbike with two other guys, stupid 16-year-old boy, and riding along for about 5 kilometres, and we're riding at night. The light went out on the bike, and instead of taking a slight bend, we went straight ahead and hit a tree. And the guy on the front got a broken ankle, the guy in the middle got a ruptured spleen, and I got 7 broken ribs, 3 shattered vertebrae, 2 punctured lungs, a bruised kidney and a fractured skull. So I certainly don't muck around when I do stuff. But that sent me on a journey, and it sent me on a journey of discovery of working out where accessibility was. And one moment I'm Superman in a school production, the next moment my mum's looking over me wondering what's going to happen and where my potential goes. And then in 1996, we were lucky enough to win a Paralympic gold medal in Atlanta. And the reason I look so pumped there is because the food in Atlanta was terrible. So hardly any of us ate. So we're exercising a lot. So seemed to lose a lot of weight. But the terminology and the way we move forward has changed immeasurably. And now we're talking about universal design and sustainability as key words that actually mean that we are encompassing as much of the community as we can. So I'd like to introduce Belinda, and she can talk through a bit of her background in how she found herself working for universal design and accessibility.
Yeah, good morning, everyone. Well, basically, I used to think that my journey into accessibility commenced when I was working within the sustainability team at the Commonwealth Games on the Gold Coast, and that's where I met Nick. Basically, through the Games, we considered people with accessibility requirements was a major part of the Games planning and delivery process, and that was by utilising the design universal design principles. Not only did that ensure like the venues were accessible for people with mobility or other impairments, but also made sure that a range of accessible provisions and facilities were provided. For instance, just through wayfinding or providing hearing augmentation through the Sportsies solution, or incorporating sign language and audio captioning into ceremonies. Through the use of universal design, it allowed the environment and the products to be used by people of without the need for adaptation or like specialised design. And working at the Games really highlighted the importance of providing a safe and enjoyable experience for all by establishing a seamless network for accessibility that left a legacy after the Games. And I like to think that I'm one of those legacies. After the Games, I took up a position with Morris Scotting Access, thanks to Nick. However, looking back now, accessibility and the principles of universal design were already part of my lived experience through everyday life. For instance, caring for my nan, she's in her 90s, and having to modify sort of elements around the house so that she could still live at home, to considering the distances that she needs to walk when we take her out, to going to her favourite cafe and making sure that like the entrance is seamless, to even just going on a holiday and ensuring like the rooms cater for her. Not only that, but I've played my whole life around sport, and you know, just adapting through sport and having to negotiate certain facilities through injuries, like with the use of crutches, but also to playing and attending venues which historically were designed primarily to meet the needs of male participants. I think over time now, the community sport and recreation facilities have now become outdated, and now are catering more for sustainable for women and girls participating in sport. And through the equality of access and implementation of principles of universal design, facilities are now being designed to support and enable everyone to participate. And this includes children and older adults, people of different sizes and abilities, people using a range of mobility aids, and the ability to host one day, for instance, the Women's Big Bash, and the next day, the Men's Big Bash, through the provision of gender neutral facilities. So, for instance, the non-inclusion of urinals within change rooms, and making it a lot more friendly for everyone. Basically, universal design helps to provide more inclusive facilities than relying on the minimum standards prescribed in the building codes, which I'll talk further to during the presentation.
Thanks, Bill. And now we've got Molly, who's currently also working with me as well.
Yeah, hi everyone. So I grew up in southwest Victoria in the country on a farm near Hamilton. I have spinal muscular atrophy, or SMA, which essentially means my muscles get weaker as I get older. So unlike Nick, I was born with my condition. So I was diagnosed when I was 18 months old, and I haven't known a life other than one needing help and being in a wheelchair and so on. So when I was growing up, I was very good at adapting to the environment around me, because that was the only real way I guess I could get by. Like, for example, the photo in the middle of me when I was a little kid on a little four-wheeler, like my dad had fashioned a little backrest that had been fixed to the four-wheeler so that I had like support and I could drive around and enjoy, you know, country life like any other kid. So I always grew up sort of feeling as though the world that I lived in definitely wasn't built for me. But it was something that I would have to adapt to get by and to achieve what I wanted to achieve. So when I finished high school, I decided to move to Melbourne, which was a big move for me. It's almost 4 hours from where I'm from. I, you know, left all my main support network. I had to get new carers in a big city that I wasn't used to, but it was honestly the best thing I've ever done. So when I moved to Melbourne, I moved to study interior design at RMIT, which I loved. I loved everything about it. That was great. And Melbourne in general definitely opened my eyes to so many more opportunities in so many ways, you know, just simple, like the simple things in day-to-day life. Like I was able to use public transport independently. Like I could go somewhere on a tram, on a train, without help, without anything like that. My university installed a changing places facility so that I could, you know, enjoy classes and be able to go to the toilet easily, but I'll get into more about changing places later in the presentation. But my world was definitely opened up moving to Melbourne and realising and incorporating universal design. That's why it happened. So yeah, then I met Nick and got the opportunity to work with him and his team, which it's been such a great experience. You know, as someone with lived experience, I've really enjoyed learning the technical side of the industry and the background, but while also having a pretty solid view, at least from my perspective, of the people that are benefiting from universal design and from, you know, incorporating accessibility in all forms. So yeah, that's a little bit about me.
Good work, Molly. That's great. I think the one thing these two ladies bring a really diverse views on what accessibility and universal design bring. For example, we often get asked in sporting facilities, why have we got an accessible change room or accessible toilet in a footy change room? And the answer is quite simple. Have you ever tried to hold up a 120 kilo ruckman who's got concussion? And so once you start thinking about things like that, that's where universal design gets really involved. So some of the simple, pardon me, some of the simple things. I'm a real advocate that we start changing the symbol and we start progressing with signage and things like that that actually start an attitudinal change. This is really interesting. This was the first time I really felt in 30 years of being in a chair that I could hang out with my kids. And my daughter was taking great delight in seeing if she can make me sick. But the beauty of this is anyone who's probably older than 40 would remember the old roundabouts in playgrounds that you had to step up to, that were worn around the outside with dirt and mud. And now I can just wheel onto that at my local park. So it's pretty amazing, to be honest, that I can do that. And that's a great example of simple universal design. I'm lucky enough that I made a phone call one day in about 2003, and it was about going and meeting the Chinese Organising Committee in Sydney. They wanted to know what accessibility was. And to cut a long story short, I went up there and I met with them, and I didn't realise how significant they lacked accessibility. And one of the first questions I got asked is, so how far do we have to go with accessibility? And I said, well, you've got the Forbidden City and you've got the Great Wall of China. We've got to make them accessible because they weren't. So we went out to a place called Battling, and there was a guy in a wheelbarrow just going up and down to get to the Great Wall of China, and he was doing maintenance with his wheelbarrow. And all of a sudden I said, well, he's pretty much got our pathway. So before you know it, we've developed accessibility to the Great Wall of China. And the photo on the left actually shows there's only about 40 square metres of space that is accessible on the Great Wall of China, but that's not the point. The point is that we were able to get people up there so that they could see how far the Great Wall of China went off in the distance. And now they're looking at producing about 4 or 5 other locations, because every weekend it gets smashed with tourists of people with accessibility needs. So it's a really great example. And I've been lucky enough to do the Statue of Christ in Rio, the Taj Mahal in India, the Blue Mosque in Istanbul, and a few others through my role with the International Paralympic Committee. But my life is one of adaptation. And this is what I suppose universal design is all about, is adapting to meet your accessibility need. And things like these. I wanted to snow ski, so how did I do it? I had an adaptable ski. I wanted to play basketball, so all of a sudden I had bought a $10,000 wheelchair. I sit on a shower seat every morning, but it's got support legs so it doesn't fall off the wall, and hand controls and things like that. And these are all the adaptations that have allowed me to really lead a full and productive life. And as Belle said a bit before, it's about accessibility needs. We actually get disability and throw it away because it doesn't actually matter what your disability is. What we want to know and what you want to know as designers and constructors is, what impact does your needs have on our environment? And as you can see, I mean, all of us at some point have had some form of accessibility need. And it's really important that we broaden it out so that people own it to understand it. For example, in the Olympics, at 4 o'clock, between 4 o'clock and 6 o'clock every night at the Olympics, we have a massive problem with fatigue, because generally people haven't worn a hat, they haven't drunk enough water, and they've generally walked more than they ever thought. And all of a sudden, shuttle buses, rest seating, all these things get smashed because what the population was fit at 9 o'clock in the morning was actually no longer fit at 5 o'clock in the afternoon. So the DDA, what's the DDA about? It's really a set of principles, and it's a federal legislation administered by the federal court. You can put a complaint into the Human Rights Commission and they will hear that complaint. And it's not about technical stuff generally. It's about those key principles. And also, as you can see there, the 7 principles of universal design. I would put it to you that if you class yourself as a good designer, you're already looking at these things. So it's really just because you've got so many things to focus on, whether it's structure, it's set out, whatever it is, specifications, we're able to help you with focusing on the universal design aspect. And I mean, Dylan Alcott often talks about disability and how he wants to improve it, but I put it to you that he's just taken it to the next level with corporate involvement of how accessibility in the future is going to be promoted with positive images like people like Dylan. And then we talk about the principles. Wellness. When you look at those terms like placemaking, sustainability, human-centered design, when you really think about it, they are all wanting the same thing. They're wanting to get maximised participation by the whole community in a facility or a venue with ease and seamlessness. And all of a sudden, the features that we're looking at are things like multi-faith, quiet and sensory rooms, all these different things. We're turning drug testing facilities into accessible toilets, into first aid toilets, so they're multi-purpose depending on when they're used. And then, as I'm sure we're all grappling with at the moment, is what is the sign for gender neutral? Unisex, all gender, no gender, whatever it is that we have to start getting the signage right so that people who would like to use those facilities actually feel included. And a sign is a simple way of making people feel included. I'm going to hand over to Belle and she can walk us through just some of the features of universal design. And probably my most favourite is the humble bench seat, which is often overlooked.
Thanks, Nick. Yeah, as Nick mentioned, like in general, the built environment, whether that be permanent or temporary, should apply to sort of like the Australian standards, the National Construction Code and the DDA. sometimes like disability, or as we should say is access or accessibility, are usually referred to as fulfilling a set of technical and measurable requirements as prescribed in these legal obligations. However, widely accepted, these usually are only the minimum starting points that should be used when determining the basic requirements for equitable access. For example, accessible features are incorporated potentially sometimes as afterthoughts. It also relies on the additional features to fill legislation requirements, so such as lifts and ramps. So providing a lift sometimes can then break down and render a building or part of a building inaccessible for sections. Additionally, the standards do not address a range of important considerations for building elements, including like general signage or wayfinding or emergency exits, communication and different fixtures and fittings and those installations. While designing facilities needs to be for people with accessibility usually results in improved access for everyone, it doesn't usually incorporate all elements to make them equitable in access. Whereas the principles of universal design guides the provision of more inclusive facilities than relying on the minimum standards. And some of these areas, so for instance, considering like the accessible drop-off and parking areas, making sure that there's a seamless access through to the building entrances, through sliding doors, the provision of shade and shelter, clear lines of sight, for instance, and providing all-weather pathways. And as Nick mentioned, the humbled rest seat. So the provision of a rest seat that has a backrest and sidearms so that my elderly Nan can help herself out of the chair. Then there's also the likes of, you know, providing flexible amenities in change rooms, baby change tables so that it's family friendly. Basically, when we're reviewing the designs, it's best to do that at the earliest stages of a project against the key principles of universal design. So we aim to create a seamless and well-connected environment that is accessible by people of all abilities and allows independent movement to and within the buildings and the surrounds. Another example, for instance, is you know, being able to use a barbecue that has a space where a wheelchair can access underneath the barbecue. And as Nick says, he can cook, you know, barbecue for his family or friends. You know, incorporating dog-friendly spaces, considering viewing locations and pool hoists in pools. And then another one, which is sort of your end of trip facilities. So what do we consider as a normal bike, you know, where there's actually a lot of bikes that we should be catering for within these facilities. So for instance, your hand cycle or your recumbent cycle, or even the provision of, you know, taking your kids out on the bike and then parking those bikes. So at the moment, a lot of end of trip facilities cater for just your run of the mill, you know, bikes, whereas maybe we should be thinking about providing those additional spaces for any bikes. Universal design will typically not add costs to a project. If we apply universal design principles, they can actually save costs. And it does this by lessening the dependence of potentially like mechanical features like lifts that require maintenance, or reducing having to retrofit later down the building stage. And universal design can also increase revenue and financial viability at facilities by catering for a cross section and encouraging, you know, patronage. And this is a good example that we work on a lot of major events. So we're committed to, you know, working with event organisers and suppliers to identify key access issues and find practical solutions to common problems. And often accommodating accessibility has been an afterthought in events process. So in some cases, it may not even have crossed the minds of event planners or planners just in the built environment. And thankfully, I think this is changing significantly now over there. And accessibility is now firmly part of everyone's agenda, and people are not only aware but increasingly understanding the requirements for providing accessibility. Just for major events, for instance, these are usually should be captured in the planning stages, and that's just the same as providing, any project that we work on should be captured within that planning stage. And it's no matter the size of the event or the project that we're working on. And also when planning for major events, one of them we work on every year is the tennis. So just in this photo here, you can see the 3 photos on the left all show 3 counters that are well above. So Nick in the wheelchair, and he's unable to get to his food from the food truck. Myself, unable to even see over the counter, and then a child that was trying to get have a look to see what ice creams were in the van. Some simple things to make it more universal designed was implementing a table in front of the food trucks so that the people serving the food can actually pass the food down. And it's not only about universal design, but it's also safety and design, so that someone's not reaching up for their hot chips or a beer and spilling it all over them. So a couple of other areas that we've worked on is providing counters in front of the sort of like that someone can put their bags on or pass the FPOS machine over to. This image here is a great example of potentially where wayfinding should have been used. So I'm not sure if you can see, but there's a parents carrying their pram down on the right-hand side down the flight of stairs. But simply, if there was wayfinding provided at the top of the stairs, there's actually an accessible ramp down beside the transport bar, which leads down to the terrace along the river. So it's a clear example of providing that accessible and universal design. And certain elements, for instance, wayfinding is a simple one to be included when planning for events and also the built environment. I'll just say, so by implementing universal design and delivering accessible facilities and services, these considerations also help to create a positive culture change and a lasting legacy within the wider community. So it's just something to think about.
Thanks, Belle. It's interesting when we do work on the tennis that in a good year, which is not the last 2 years, is that their precinct extends from Federation Square to Birrarung Ma to Melbourne Park down to Richmond Station as a precinct. So to try and create seamless accessibility and universal design along that whole area is pretty amazing. And I'll just give you one example where we got it wrong. We decided to do a family-friendly, or Tennis Australia decided to do a family-friendly event on the upper terrace of Birrarung Ma. The unfortunate thing is if you had walked along or wheeled a stroller or whatever along the riverbank to get up to the upper terrace, if you walked up the stairs, it would have taken you 2 minutes. If you had have wheeled your stroller, it would have meant 1.5 kilometres to get up to the upper terrace. So in the planning, that wasn't thought of very well. And so simple things. So Molly's just going to talk us through some of the basics, which are toilets. And I often spend too much time talking about toilets, but they're probably one of the most important things.
Yeah, so here are some toilets, as Nick said. These are some simple cut and paste toileting facilities that, most of us will recognise. They're all gender neutral, but they cater to a really wide variety of needs. And yeah, let's be honest, if there's something we want in life, it's to be able to go to the toilet when we need to. I think it's pretty important. I think most people will struggle to even imagine not having the option of a toileting facility at their at their fingertips, aside from the occasional situation where people are shopping in the city and they just don't want to use the public toilets because they're disgustingly dirty or something like that. But I've honestly known so many people, including myself on occasion, who have become dangerously dehydrated or have avoided an outing altogether because an accessible toileting facility just wasn't provided for them. So
just on that, Molly, I was just going to say that one of the key elements to this is now providing gender neutral ambulant or non-ambulant facilities next to accessible, so that it's not just about trans or intersex people who want that. It's people with body image. It's taking a guide dog in there. You might have somebody who's a parent with a child, and now what we're doing, turning accessible facilities, putting first aid kits in there, sharps disposal bins, all those things, and making them very universal so that families feel welcome as well. I mean, I had a lady with 2 kids who I could hear was screaming within the accessible toilet because she had them captive, which was fantastic because I've been a parent and been down that path. But she was apologetic when she came out of the toilet, and that was actually quite confronting for me, that she felt that she was an intruder in that toilet, and that's not the case. So we're now reflecting on signage. The signage actually doesn't say disabled or toilet, it actually says accessible toilet. So by having that signage and having the pictogram, it means that we start to change the culture and psyche about it. But so Molly, just talk us through the changing places toilets and why they exist and what impact they have for you.
Yeah. So changing places has been pretty massive in my life. So the first time I think I used a changing places or an adult change facility was when, back before I lived in Melbourne, and I used to travel to Melbourne all the time to go to the Royal Children's Hospital for appointments and things. And yeah, we went to Ballarat one day and we just literally stumbled, and I'd always have to manage my toileting, which was a 4-hour drive, so that I, would go before I left home and then once I got to the Royal Children's Hospital. But we stopped for lunch or something in Ballarat one day and we came across this accessible toilet, and it was the first one like in a public sort of space like this that I'd experienced, and it was just amazing. It just meant that I could stop, have a coffee, have 2 coffees on my way to Melbourne without having to rush because of the simple fact that I needed to be able to go to the toilet. So that's like probably my first example with changing places. But I also think changing places facilities, a lot of people they sort of go, okay, high care, but I just think that they cater for such a wide variety of care. So, as simple as someone that's in a chair all day, I don't know, maybe they have a catheter system or something, but they just need to like stretch out. So like lie down or get out of their chair, have a bit of a wriggle around, something as simple as that. Like I just think it helps people in so many more ways than just the obvious thing of going to the toilet. And I think that, yeah, you go, Nick.
That's exactly right. No, just quickly, I've got a mate of mine who was 45 years of age. He had a brain hemorrhage, and in the space of 12 months, he went from being a lawyer working on the bushfires to being a guy who could walk 2 kilometres, was incontinent and couldn't remember his mother's name. And for them to take him out to the theatre or a show or the park, he genuinely needed a changing places facility. Now, a bit of a misnomer that you need to know is that these are operated by an MLAP key. So, for example, someone like me who is very independent, I don't actually have a key to get into a changing places facility. You get issued a key that allows you to use it, it keeps it clean and all those things because they're very specialised. So, just moving on, I just want to share some thoughts and finalisation. The photo on the left-hand side is of a little boy or a little girl whose parents decided that not having legs would not slow them down. And it's amazing how we're now 2021 and how universal design, accessibility, and all these things are so important, but so is the attitudinal change that the Paralympics and all those events start to create a really inclusive society. But you can get it wrong. So in Beijing, the day before the tennis centre was open, the look and feel of, or the look team decided to put that look and feel up right in front of the accessible viewing platform. And it took us probably half the day to get it pulled down before they realised. But once again, disability, illness and injury don't matter. What matters is universal design and how we can design things better so they encompass accessibility needs. It's worth money. The tourism industry is $8 billion for accessibility and growing because of the ageing population. Something I have quite strong views about is how often we get asked by architects and others to sign off on a particular specification. And my point is, no, the suppliers who you're buying the key products off, they should be providing a sign-off that is fit for purpose and compliant. So things like tactile indicators and stair nosing and all those things. I love working on planning reports because it gives us a chance to work with you in the concept where levels and cores are not necessarily set so that we can work out whether it's better to have a 1 in 20 graded walkway with no tactiles and handrails versus a 1 in 14 ramp with handrails and tactiles, or a platform lift, which is not really universal. And once again, it's going to be about everyone. In our life cycle, everyone is going to use it. And that's what I think the message I'd like to take away is accessibility and universal design are really ingrained into everyone's lifestyle. Brisbane, 2032, it's coming, 11 years. And it's something that is really exciting in my world. And it's amazing how we'll be looking at training venues, we'll be looking at community events, we'll be looking at torch relays that go all around Australia. And to be part of that, but actually using accessibility and universal design as key pillars, because I worked on the bid, and one of the key elements of the bid was how universal design and accessibility would be implemented by the host city. So, and once again, that the young boy or girl sitting on the hand side will hopefully has got 10 years to get them together so that one day they might be able to represent their country in Brisbane 2032. So thanks everyone for listening to our presentation, and hopefully it invoked a bit of discussion to just take it to the next step and really consider where universal design and accessibility can change the design or construction. Any questions?
Amazing. Thank you so much for that, Nick. I'm just going to go back to our WIDAC slides here, and we're going to pop up a couple of polling questions first. And if you do have any questions that we will open up to all of our amazing presenters today, pop them in the chat and I will sling them through to everyone. Just give me 1 second. These polling questions are going to help us get a better understanding of what we have learned today. So there we go. Anybody getting those? There we go.
I like the answers.
Just another minute to let everybody answer. And then I'll share the results as well. All right, we might end it there and I will share the correct answers. So, first question, at what stage of the design process? Most of you got that absolutely correct. It should be in the planning. Sustainability and accessibility are definitely intrinsically linked, as Nick was saying, and I think Belinda was also saying it's about creating a more usable facility long term and getting those that usage out of the facility. And most of the DDA complaints are not actually about technical non-compliance, they are about safety and usability. Alrighty, so we have had a couple of questions come through. I will come back here. So our first question was about legislation and that the DDA is federal legislation. Can you tell me if this is the same for universal design? Is it legislated?
Universal design? No, it's not legislated, but the Victorian government insists on every one of their government tenders for hospitals, sporting facilities and others that tenderers respond to how they will incorporate universal design. So it's definitely an incorporation.
And so would there be a good way to get the clients and developers on board if it isn't legislated?
Look, I think it comes back to reputation and being able to say, look, let's do workshops with accessibility. And it's about working with wayfinders, landscapers, because landscape doesn't have any technical requirements under the National Construction Code for accessibility. So to work with those people as well as wayfinders in the early stages just gives a better overall review. It's a bit like safety and design. There is no mandate to get a safety and design report, but everyone knows it's a smart thing to do to make sure that your design covers off areas where somebody may not have thought of.
We've got a question here from Imogen. If we encourage the use of accessible toilets by a broader community, not just for people with a disability, would you propose we increase the provision? A common complaint that I've heard is that sometimes people might need to urgently use the bathroom. If there's not enough of them, then we might be clogging up the use of a facility that's urgently required by some people and less urgently by others. Would be interested to hear your 2 cents.
I couldn't agree more, and that's where we're starting now, and I've worked on 5 projects where we're trying to get an accessible toilet, a universal accessible toilet, and then a universal ambulant toilet located next to it, so that you don't have to go into a gender facility to use one of those 2 facilities for exactly that reason. But the other one, and I'm really glad you raised it, is for us to understand the demographic of the facilities we're building and to be able to talk to our developers and others and say, we believe that there's actually extra demand for an accessible toilet or more ambulant toilets. Let's put them in so that it better reflects the demographic that we're going to be attracting. Because I couldn't agree more. You don't want to clog something up, but it actually says we've got flexibility.
That's interesting. It actually kind of leads into the next question that I have here. By grouping pregnancy, physical disability, fatigue, visual impairment, and unisex design, are we being sensitive to those communities, or the preference is to lose the stigma and look at it all as a more universal design?
In my world, it's about looking at the functionality, and yes, you can look at all those individual groups as a particular need. There is no doubt about that. Like neurodiversity is now becoming quite an important element, or people with colour blindness. But the thing that we can do is try and get as universal as possible in the design stage and then help others when we get to the wayfinding and operations. That's the thing, we can't solve every problem via design and construction. There is actually an operation to how a building works, whether it be training, management plans, or other things that actually complement the way we've built a building. How often we don't go in there and actually share with the operators, hey, look, did you know that we've got 4 gender neutral toilets, we've got a multi-faith room, we've got a parents room, so that they actually understand the facilities we've built as well and how they should operate.
This next one I might actually throw to Belinda.
Sure.
One of my clients wanted an all-gender toilet sign, but the building surveyor insisted it said unisex. What options are there to negotiate this?
Yeah, look, I think there's no issue if the client wants to provide an all-gender facility and signage. It's still, as long as it's got the correct braille and specifications on there, I don't think there should be any issue from a building surveyor suggesting that it should be signed as a unisex toilet.
I think the issue though is that to go away from a unisex sign is a performance solution technically under the National Construction Code, because a building surveyor looks at it and says, that's what the regulation says, that's what it looks like, that's what I want installed. And I think what it is for people like us to be able to say, well, why don't we do a performance solution that's equally as compliant, and here's an alternative.
Next question. We've got quite a few actually. I think this is just such a fascinating topic and such an important topic to chat. We'll keep on going for a little bit,
Sure.
but I am keeping an eye on the time. Do you think the environment, designed and regulatory, currently caters well enough for people with invisible disabilities like deafness, autism and chronic fatigue?
Great question. I think we're getting better at it. Look, let's be honest, it was only 2009 when all of this got implemented with the National Construction Code. We've now got SDA housing, which is starting to come in because we're getting big money because of the NDIS, which is terrific. I think what it is doing forums like this where we get experts in autism, because I'm not an expert in autism, but getting experts in autism and other accessibility or disability to share their views. So for example, I know with dementia and housing, the design is such that people will be able to see their toilet from their bed. So it reminds them they need to go to the toilet. So some of those idiosyncrasies are really vital when we're designing, and getting experts who can provide that. The 10% of enhancement is really important.
As international experience and wayfinding designers, we're typically or often introduced to the project too late and have to add a sign to try and make the architecture work as universal design. We specialise in global best practice for universal design and are encouraging architects to get involved earlier. We are encouraged, however, that Australia seems to be leading the world with rigorous DDA code.
I agree with you. I think we're in a really good place in Australia. We're doing a really good job. Once again, I mean, I wouldn't think there'd be a person who's in this forum right now who wouldn't like to slow a project down so we could give a better review of the way the building's been built or how it's operating. And it's the same with us. If we get called in too late, then gender neutral toilets or getting rid of urinals or all those things just are off the table. And I'll put one more on the table, which is probably the most vital out of all of this, is emergency evacuation. Is that there is no mandate under the National Construction Code for emergency evacuation that's accessibility based. Mm-hmm. Now, if you have horizontal evacuation, you have fire safe lifts, you know where your wardens are going to be, then anyone who can't use stairs, we put together an operation. And that's what it's about, because refuges are not the answer. I don't want to be put into a concrete box so that all of a sudden we've ticked the box. I want to be next to the warden so that within 5 to 7 minutes when the fire brigade comes, they can tell me if the lift is safe or if it's not safe to move in either direction. So that's something I'd love for the participants to take up as well, is that whole emergency evacuation as well.
Okie dokie. Last question here. This has been so insightful and fascinating, and I hope that everybody has taken a lot on board, especially about adding this element of design into the very, very early stages of a project and getting people like you involved and your company involved at the early stages. Last question, how do we tackle diversity of needs, particularly when they are conflicting? The built environment is pretty inflexible. Even when the environment is designing according to universal design principles, some people are likely to still be excluded. So how do we manage this?
Great question. I'll give you an absolute example. Tactile indicators. Nick Morris, as a wheelchair user, dislikes them immensely. So, for example, we don't put them into Hoyt cinemas within the cinema box because you're in a dark environment. And we're now pulling them off back of house and service areas because all they're doing is getting damaged by trolleys and stuff. And also in gymnasiums, we pull them out, but in lieu, we put in colour and texture and different floor surfaces and things like that. So it is a game of trying to encompass the biggest benefit for all people. And it's a hard job, but that's why you are good designers and we consider the right thing. As long as we exhaust all options to come up with what we think is a better outcome, and then you can't do more than that. And that's really just getting the right people giving you right advice so that we can make sure that we've covered as much of it as possible. Because I don't know about you, but I haven't built the perfect building.
Thank you so much for that, Nick. And also a really huge thank you to Belinda and Molly for sharing your insight and stories. That was really wonderful and insightful. I also really want to thank Maya, our diversity coordinator, who has championed this event for us. I'm so glad that you were able to put this together for us, that we could experience it. A quick thank you to all of our wonderful sponsors, Ortex Shape, CGC, Bluebeam, Cova, and Osco, FDC, TTM, and a huge thank you in particular to Polytech, who is our digital sponsor and sponsors our beautiful digital events that we can do that make it more accessible for people to attend our events. Keep in touch with us at WIDAC. We are here. We love LinkedIn. We love connecting with everybody who has come through and seen our events. Have a lovely day, everyone, and you will be receiving the link to the recording for this event shortly.
Thank you so much, guys. We're so grateful, for sharing your personal journeys with accessibility, and it's made for a really powerful event. So thank you.
Thank you.
Our pleasure. Thanks for that.
Thanks, guys.
See you later.
Bye.
See ya.